Humanianity, a new religious call. Humanianity, religion for us all. Humanity, now we all can see. Humanity, how much better we can be.
Hi, I'm Bill Van Fleet, and this is Humanianity Conversation number 75, recorded on August 28th, 2020. It is the 33rd recorded conversation with my friend Mike. We continued to try to clarify what the actual disagreements were between us with regard to whether definitions are beliefs or not, and whether there are meaningful reasons for having a solipsistic worldview. It looked like we made some progress, but the issues preventing coming to complete agreement seemed complex and interesting. We plan to continue. Uh, let's see, we have two issues, right? One is solipsism, and the other is definition versus belief.
Right, and I think the definition versus belief was in the context of solipsism. It was whereas my definitions, how I'm oriented to understanding definitions, is informed by solipsism and phenomenology, which is that that's how I think they're related. And we ended the last talk by us sharing our various perspectives on and really how we saw the definition of the word definition a little bit differently. So I propose we start there.
Okay. Well, I guess in starting there, what we ought to do is leave out solipsism for the time being,
Right.
and just ask the question: well, what do these words mean? And we're trying to distinguish between a definition and a belief. And one thing that I think that helps is, what we're meaning by belief is a particular programming or set of enhanced neuronal connections in the brain, and the correlation, whatever is correlated with to that within conscious experience and so on, which gets into the mind-body problem and so on. But then we have the linguistic modeling of those beliefs, and they are in sentences or propositions. And the way you can tell whether a proposition is a model of a belief is if it is preceded by the words, I believe that. So I believe that it is going to rain. It is going to rain is then a belief. I believe that it is going to rain. Now, we're talking about a definition, and there can be some confusion over what it is that we're talking about. But a definition is not a belief. However, we can have the belief that such and such is an appropriate definition, or is the dictionary definition, or is the definition that most people use, or is the definition that we have decided upon, and so on. For instance, in group discussions where a person says, well, what is the definition of such and such? That almost makes the assumption, or it sounds like it is assuming that there is a correct definition. And if one does specify, like, okay, in the field of physics, the definition of energy is such and such, then there can be, because that's a technical field, there can be just one definition. In a group discussion, somebody might say, well, what is the definition of such and such? And they'd look it up on their cell phone and find that there are 3 or 4 definitions, which is consistent with the fact that when we use our words, we often use them in different ways to mean different things. And we consider that the context of the discussion will clarify which of the definitions is being used. So, so one can have the belief that X is the appropriate definition for the current situation, or is the accepted definition by most people, or is the official definition in this particular technical field, or something like that. But the definition itself is not a belief. It is just a putting together of symbols, saying this symbol stands for this set of symbols. And it's a proposal for agreement. Now, does that sound right to you?
I think it sounds right from a certain point of view. And I think the point of view that I take is very different. That is correct if you consider the definition of a belief and the definition of the word definition. In the context of, as you were talking, I was trying to figure out, what that word is. Let me put it to you this: the best word I could do in an empirical context versus a phenomenological context. What I mean by an empirical context is understanding the definitions and the terms in the context of things outside of your subjective experience that you're assuming to be true. I have a very different orientation to understanding and characterizing what those terms mean. So let me try it out. Let me say how I view it and understand it. So what's relevant here when we consider the terms and the differences between a definition and a belief, and if there is any difference, are the terms a priori and posteriori. And I think I'm pronouncing them right. I think it might be posteriori, but I never. Anyway, it's a priori and posteriori. I think that's how I pronounce them anyway. I don't know Latin, but anyway, it's the idea of whether you can know something in a very, very layman terms, and there might be, some differences, but in the way I'm talking about it in very, very layman terms is the difference between knowledge that requires experience for us to obtain and knowledge that is kind of innate and doesn't require any experience. there are very, very, very few things I maintain that we know that does not require experience. Very, very, very few things. And when knowledge requires experience, and I would put definitions under that heading, they must require a belief. If you have an experience of something, you have the separation between self and the thing you're experiencing. Okay, that means that you have to interpret that experience. That interpretation requires, it's another word for, interpretation is another word for belief. Now, when we're adults, there are certain things that we may not realize we learned posteriori through experience. But if you go back in time to when we were an infant or very, very young, you'll realize that the things that we assume are definitive were really beliefs that we formed so early in life that we now consider them to be a priori, just innately the way it is, when that's not really what happened. It's that we learn those things through experience, through the separation between self and the experience, the interpretation of that experience. So now, where this all fits into how I understand to be, how I understand what the word definition is, any definition, for you to accept it, requires experience. Experience must involve belief. Therefore, I maintain that the difference between a definition and a belief is almost semantic. There is really no difference. A definition is a belief. It's just a belief that's been accepted generally by the general public as true. That's my orientation to it. And it's an orientation that involves, a primarily phenomenological orientation. It's what's happening inside of somebody's head, rather than, I think, more of an empiricist orientation, which is kind of how are things outside someone's subjective experience. Did I just say what's happening inside someone's head? I didn't mean, I got to stop saying that term. What I mean by what's happening inside of somebody's subjective experience, rather than what's happening outside the subjective experience. So that's how I understand, and that's a radically different perspective and orientation than I think you're taking, which is more empiricist in nature.
Well, okay. Now, I didn't want to interrupt you, but at several points.
Just go like this if you need me to stop.
Okay, but I didn't want to do that. I had talked at some length, and I thought,
thank you.
It would be good for you to be able to present your whole position. But there were several problematic things in it. So now we need to go back over it and stop and take a look at where I think that there are difficulties. A priori and a posteriori, those concepts, as I understand it, they have to do with essentially if one is dealing with a logical system, and a priori really is just referring to whatever one is going to take for granted as being true. And actually, in a system of logic, true and false are just properties of a proposition. So one doesn't even have to have a definition of true or false. It's just it's a label to use for a particular proposition. So a posteriori is anything which then is not taken for granted, but it relies upon that which may or may not be true and is taken as true for uh, uh, tentatively for the current purposes, and so something like that. I could be a little bit off on that, uh, but essentially it is the difference between the axioms in a logical system and the things that follow from those axioms.
My understanding of it, this
Okay.
comes from a area of philosophy of epistemology, which is a study of how we know what we know.
Uh-huh.
And it can be applied to systems of logic, those ideas. It could also be applied to our understanding of reality, of existence, how we know what we know. Kant, I think, was the first person who really popularized it, although I think it was other philosophers had used it. So I think those terms were first thought of and first used outside of a logical system.
Yeah,
and they can be applied to systems of logic, but within the system of logic that and the definition you just described, I would agree. I think the way you use those terms were accurate within a system of logic, but they could certainly still be used outside that system to refer to knowledge that is gained, to refer to knowledge that is innate versus knowledge that is gained through experience. For example, 2 + 2 = 4. I mean, this is what a professional philosopher would say, I think. They would say 2 + 2 = 4 is a priori. It is the way it is regardless of our experience. That would kind of be an example. And I think some of the things you're talking about in terms of what a definition is, a philosopher would agree that a lot of those things are just a priori knowledge. It's assumed to be true. It's more than just assumed to be true. We know these things without, just innately, without having to gain them through experience. I think where I differ, and where phenomenologists and solipsists differ from more of the mainstream philosophical thinking, is that we would put a lot more things in the posteriori bucket than most people and most philosophers would. I would argue that almost everything is posteriori except the idea, as I think Heidegger put it, this idea of being in the world, this feeling that you have, this consciousness. Consciousness is really the only thing that is a priori. I would argue even sensations, even thoughts, feelings are posteriori from a certain sense. And I think if I was in a philosophy class, I'd probably get an F on a paper that I wrote on that. But nonetheless, that's what I think. So that's the way my understanding of a priori and posteriori.
Uh-huh.
Do you have? Is there an issue with that definition that you have? Excuse me. Is there an issue with the What's the issue with that orientation that I have? Do you think?
Okay, the orientation, that gets us back to solipsism, phenomenology, and so on. And yes, I do.
Versus empiricism.
Well, I have a problem with assigning these words to it that then we would have to look up and see if indeed they meant what we thought that they meant and so on. Um, uh, I kind of know what you mean, but the let's see, one issue to capture here is the idea of innate knowledge, uh, and that would be innate beliefs that
That's not what I mean by that.
okay, see, so we have we're linguistically in quite different worlds.
Well, I think that yeah, I could kind of see that to a certain degree. I think the real critical difference is something that I mentioned in passing before, which when I talked about the separation between self and object. Okay, that is the key difference between something that is known innately versus something that is known through experience. If if I cannot separate myself and experience and get an experience of something, that almost by definition has to be innate knowledge. So when I think about my thoughts, okay, I would argue at least, I experience my thoughts. I experience my feelings, okay? There is something that I don't experience that I can't get, for lack of a better word, that I can't separate from myself to get an experience of it.
Well,
And that is my consciousness. So my consciousness is innate. And I would argue almost, I'm going to use the word almost, but I probably really mean everything else. I would argue almost everything else is through experience.
okay, there is a very basic fundamental problem and difficulty in what with what you are talking about, and that has to do with this concept of self. You're making the assumption, I think, that you can perceive yourself, and yet the
No,
self.
I'm saying you can't. I'm saying the opposite. You can't perceive yourself.
Then you cannot perceive that which is not yourself. In other words, if there's no dividing line between self and non-self, then we don't have a concept. So
say that again.
Okay, let me use a different analogy and then refer to self. Let's say that I am assigning a label to a particular thing, and you want to clarify, well, what is that thing that I'm assigning a label to? And so you say, now tell me everything that is in that you are labeling that, and everything that is not in it. In other words, what is the boundary? How can I tell whether this is, whether the word X, the word that you are using, is applying to this or that? And I say, well, there is no boundary. You cannot observe a boundary. There's no way of determining whether a particular thing is a part of X or is not a part of X. Well, then X has no meaning. X has no meaning. It doesn't do anything.
Okay. I think that the problem is coming from the way I'm using the word experience. So, okay.
Well, wait.
Well, I would kind of agree with that. Keep going. I think there are some problems with that line of thought, but go ahead.
Okay. Now, the problem is that although the term self has real significant utility, it is not something that is can be observed. One can, and I realize that that doesn't sound right, but in the first place, when the infant comes out into the world, it does not have a sense of self. That is gradually acquired. And it really has more to do with like that which is always present, as opposed to those things that appear and disappear. But then it can have even more meaning than that. And but the analogy, see, like you cannot observe your consciousness. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Okay. Now, I could imagine that people would say, "Well, we don't agree." So let me just use my example that I've used before. We can take a part of one's consciousness, namely one's vision, and we refer to the visual field. And so the visual field, we figure, is something that exists and can be perceived. However, I would maintain that the visual field cannot be observed. One can only observe things that we say are in the visual field. And to verify this experimentally, I would say, okay, if you close one eye, and then you ask, well, what is the shape of the visual field? You would probably say it was the shape of a circle or a disc. However, it is not. It is the shape of a donut with a small hole. And you cannot see that hole. You cannot see the boundary between what you can see and what you can't. You can verify that it's there by holding your hand out at arm's length and your fingers spread apart and watching the back of your hand and looking at your thumb. And if you turn your hand just right, you will not be able to see your little finger, but you cannot see the hole where there is no visual field. So you can't actually see your visual field. If you were able to see it, then you would be able to see the hole in it, and you would be able to see the external boundary, which you cannot see.
Okay, so let me respond. Are you
figure it out because you can trace on a wall
right.
where you just begin to see, and then step back and look, and you can see a circle, but you can't see that. So you can't see the phenomenon of visual field.
Right. Let me take visual field first, and then I'd like to go back about the idea of consciousness not being able to be observed directly, and if that has some kind of implication on its actual existence. So first with the visual field. I believe the way you're characterizing a visual field versus things in that visual field is semantics. That is not the way that I experience my sight. The things that I see is the visual field. So my argument is phenomenologically, the idea of a visual field that things are in is simply semantic and a function of language. It's a fantasy that somebody can imagine because of the language that we have and the words we have, and we can make analogies with other concepts. But in terms of how I experience my vision as the things that I see is my visual field. That's the first thing.
Okay.
Go ahead.
See, I agree with that. I agree with that. That it is just a linguistic or semantic
Right.
kind of.
Now let me continue to show how
What we're
that's
saying.
different. So we agree on that.
What we're saying is that we are using the term visual field to mean all of those things that we see,
Correct.
as opposed to those things that we don't.
Right.
And so that's just but that doesn't mean that we actually see an entity called the visual field.
Right. Now, but to make an analogy between that, which I agree with, and consciousness is problematic.
Why?
Because the way that I experience my visual field is very different than the way I experience my consciousness. And let me explain how I can experience my consciousness. I agree with you. Because consciousness is a priori, I can't experience it directly. However, I can certainly I'm not going to try to talk about this empirically. I'm going to continue phenomenologically. That is simply not the way I experience things, and I don't know if you do or other people do, but there is a feeling, a sense that I have that I see, I think, I feel, I am experiencing these things. Okay, so by virtue of that split, I can infer and I can experience, by virtue of that split, my consciousness. I mean, so I can't see it directly because it's a priori, but I can experience it relative to these other things, which is, it's a feeling that I have that is very different than vision. So I think to apply that analogy is false.
So we need to back up a little bit, because there's something that is obscure or ambiguous here, as I am hearing it. In the first place, so if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that, quote, I can experience my consciousness. Did I say that correctly?
Again, no, I would not agree with that statement because of the way
Okay.
using experience. I think you have to, please explain what you mean by experience a bit more. I
Well,
can't experience my consciousness the way I can experience my thoughts or the way I experience my vision. No, I don't. It's a priori.
Well, see, using a priori term,
It's innate. Consciousness is innate.
that is still a introduces an ambiguous term. Innate would what that means is that we are born with it, or something like that. And
Well, I can define what I mean by innate.
okay,
Innate is something that cannot be experienced. Innate is something that cannot be understood in terms of self and object. So I can't experience my consciousness like I experience my thoughts, or I experience my vision, or I experience pain, or I experience music.
Did you say experience your consciousness?
Right, you cannot, all right, I cannot do that the way I experience these other things because it is innate. I can't make it.
What does innate mean?
When something is innate, it cannot be experienced as an object.
Uh, I thought innate meant that it was inborn.
Um, I'm trying to think of maybe a different word. There is a word that's I don't remember what it's in psychology. It's the word that means differentiate. I think the word is differentiated. Innate is something that cannot be differentiated. I think that's the right word. And differentiated means it can't be experienced as an object. The cell, you can't split yourself from the object and experience it. That is consciousness. Everything else that we experience is differentiated. The consciousness is undifferentiated. So we cannot get an experience of it directly. That's what I mean by that more.
Can you clarify whether your consciousness is yourself or not?
You know, self is, I would put in the category of that's real poetry. You have to explain what you mean by self more.
There we go. You see, now you are experiencing what I'm talking about. That the self is a poorly defined but useful kind of concept. Uh, but as far as the self being something that is observable, um, there's no way really of being precise about that.
Well, there's a good reason for why we can't be precise. We can't be precise about it because we can't differentiate. We cannot experience it. That's why that's real poetry. Even when I say consciousness, it's like, what the hell do you mean by that? And the only way I could try to define it is I say something like, well, it's that feeling you have, or it's that thing that is experiencing your sight and when you hear music, and some people will say, oh, I know what you mean, and other people will say, what the hell are you talking about? That makes no sense. Mm-hmm. So this is an area that I've talked about this at the philosophy groups. This is an area we will never crack this. I don't believe humanity will ever crack that, because that is undifferentiated, and it is impossible for us to experience it. We'll never understand it fully. We'll never be able to get at it.
Well, I do indeed. I know that there are questions that are going to be unanswerable. There are two of them. Why does anything exist at all? And number two is, why is it the way that it is? Mm. And it's because as soon as you answer, then the question can be asked again, well, why that? And then, well, why that? And you have an regress and so on. Okay, so so we have words that have no real precise meaning, but have some utility.
Now, I can bring this back to truth if you want.
I
think we're going too far. Okay, we're going too fast. Okay.
That would be much too far.
Okay.
I think we're going back. That this problem of our disagreeing about whether definition is a belief or not, the problem is being created by the difference in worldviews that we have, where yours is solipsistic and phenomenological, yes. Mine is not. And the difference between those two things is whether there is such a thing as reality. Uh, now,
or whether we can have what degree of, I would say it's what degree of confidence we can have in that reality.
no, that's
No.
that's something separate. See, you and I agree, I believe, that our beliefs about reality, about what exists independent of anybody perceiving or thinking about it. Um, uh, let's see, I lost it here. Uh, whether that exists or not. Let me start again. Um, the concept of reality is, uh, I believe, inherent in our recognition that we can make mistakes, that we have beliefs about what is likely to happen or what we are likely to find or something like that. And then we find out that we have made a mistake and that we could have done it differently. In fact, somebody else maybe did it correctly and it worked, and so on. So that means that there is some kind of externally imposed um, standard uh, to uh, to compare our beliefs to. Yes, go ahead.
Now, can you substantiate that?
Yes.
Don't try to prove it because I know it's not provable. Can you at least provide an argument to substantiate the idea that because you can be wrong, there is some kind of absolute standard that exists outside of either your mind or the minds of multiple people?
Well, yes. What does it mean to be wrong?
I maintain to be wrong. We've talked about this, I think, last time and even the time before. To be wrong is to prove your subjective, is to prove that the prediction you had in your subjective experience was wrong. It's an assumption you made in your subjective experience was incorrect. That
Yeah,
doesn't say anything about what's out there.
but wait a minute. What does that mean? But being wrong. What
It
does being
it it,
wrong mean?
it means that an assumption you made in your phenomenal in your subjective experience
A belief.
it turned out to be didn't pan out, turned out to be incorrect. It
What
didn't
does that
didn't
mean?
come to fruition.
What does
The
that
prediction you had didn't come to fruition.
what does that mean?
It means just that the prediction you had. That's where I need you to go the extra step. I maintain it means that the prediction you had did not pan out, did not come to fruition. Now I need your help in going from there to now saying something about reality.
Yeah, that's what we mean by reality.
I understand but that sounds to me not like poetry, but a gigantic assumption. And to other phenomenologists or other solipsists, that sounds like a gigantic assumption. And I am not saying that there is no reality. I'm just saying that the argument you're making doesn't show in any kind of convincing way, in my opinion, of that reality, or even more so of the reality you think it is. I guess that would be more specific.
But that's what it means. That uh, that you can believe something and it can be wrong. Being wrong means that what you believed was not what is actually true in reality. Now, the problem is that I know that in your solipsistic phenomenological position, you redefine the word reality such that, in postmodernism, I should say, that reality is redefined as reality for you is what you believe. Reality for me is what I believe. But that's a distortion of the basic idea of reality.
See, I would maintain that the solipsists would argue, I'm not distorting the definition of reality. The definition of reality that you're using is the commonplace definition, which is completely inaccurate.
Well, wait.
So what it's not a redefinition of it. It's a
To
clarification of
say
it.
that to say that the definition is inaccurate implies that there is an accurate definition. What I'm saying is that the original idea of reality uh, was and continues to be, to a great extent, that which exists independent of anybody's beliefs about it or perceptions of it. And so uh, the uh, so when somebody has a belief about it, it can turn out that that belief is wrong. It does not reflect reality. Now, the postmodernist subverts the meaning of the word reality and truth to say, well, there's um, your reality and there's my reality, and they may not be the same. Or there's your truth and there's my truth, and they may not be the same. Uh, that is a distortion, a corruption of the original idea and meaning of those terms.
You know what this sounds like to a certain degree? And I just want to clarify what I'm about to say. It's not coming from me. It's coming from people way smarter than me, philosophers, legendary philosophers and whatnot. But it sounds to me like what you're saying. I could make an analogy with. I could say that let's go back to the whatever it is, the 1500s. And we're having a discussion, and I came to you and I said, the world is round. And you kind of say to me, what the hell are you talking about? Look it up in the 15th century Wikipedia. The world is flat. We experience is flat. That's how we use the word. It's what it is. And continuing that analogy, the way you are adhering to the use of words and concepts, there is no space for innovation. There is no space for reorientation or an improvement of knowledge.
Why?
Because you let me say this. There's an opportunity for increased knowledge and increased accuracy, quote unquote, to a certain degree, as long as you don't fundamentally violate or try to change the definition of a word and what it means. That's, I think, kind of contrary to human progress throughout centuries.
The problem is that, except in technical fields, there can be different definitions of words, and we use words metaphorically all the time and use them in ways that are different from, like, their, quote, more original meanings.
Absolutely. But there are times and certain points in history where the technical terms kind of filter into, the commonplace terminology.
Yes, but not accurately. A good example is that of energy. we talk about having lots of energy, and that's something entirely different from what the physicist means by energy.
Right. So you kind of say, which one, well, that's a good question for you as an empiricist. Which one is the truth? Which definition?
The question is unanswerable. You'd have to say, well, in the technical field, which one is the correct definition?
Ah,
Uh,
okay.
in the world in general, as people usually use it, which definition is the one that is used?
Okay. So that to me sounds like you're saying both are true at the same time.
No, no.
Okay.
Uh,
How so are you not saying that? Then what are you saying?
what I'm saying is that the term energy is used with different meanings, just like we could in English have a particular word which in China, if you said it, would mean something entirely different.
Granted, but if the musician uses the word energy to mean X, and the physicists use the energy to mean Y, right? They're both true, right? I mean, you can't say to the musician, what you just said is false because energy actually means this, and then pull out the physicist's definition of the word energy. They're both true,
But see,
simultaneously.
but they are not. They are not sentences um, that have the same meaning. They're not. The words do not have the same meaning. So it's not that. It's not that one sentence can be true and the other sentence can be true, but that doesn't mean that the word energy in this case means the same thing in those sentences. So those sentences mean different things. They are not in conflict with each other.
Right. But the point I'm trying to make here is how the musician and how the physicist is defining energy could be opposite and both true. This provides evidence, in my opinion.
What? The,
What? Go ahead.
uh, the term true is not applicable to the definition. True is applicable to a belief. Now, it can be true that in the field of physics, the definition of energy is fill in the blank. That's a belief about how a word is being used. It's a belief about a definition. But the definition itself is neither true nor false. It is an agreed upon use of a word, that the word will stand for such and such.
Well, this goes back to what we were saying earlier in this conversation, that I maintain when, especially when people come, when multiple people are in agreement with something, okay, they've acquired that knowledge through experience. When you experience something, it requires an interpretation, and that is another word for a belief. So I think to make it to differentiate between a definition, a group definition, and a belief is not accurate.
But I think there is a differentiation. A group definition is a definition that has been decided upon by a group. It
Based
is
on what?
just that, well, it's an easy word, or it would be different. How I came up with Humanianity uh, had to do with a whole bunch of things, including similarity to Christianity and what I was trying to convey and so forth. But that doesn't mean um, that I could not have used some other word than Humanianity. Uh, and,
Right.
and of
Certainly.
course, the group uh, that decided upon that definition was a group of one. and and but if indeed it becomes accepted widespread that there's maybe some value in the concept, then there would be agreement among groups. Yeah, we know what we're talking about. Humanianity. Yeah, we know. Um,
See, we are having trouble coming to an agreement because of the orientations we're having again. I think that in every single thing, almost, in every concept we convey to each other, I make the assumption that I can't trust anything outside my subjective experience. And you making the assumption that you can do that. And it's
no,
causing us, I think,
I can't
to.
no, I can't trust anything in my subjective experience.
We're right, even more to my point. And I think it makes it. Um, I think maybe what we should be talking about is start talking about these orientations,
Yes.
and is one right and one wrong? I don't think so. And I think we're going to realize that we can't show that one is right or one is wrong, and maybe the best we could do is show the utility of one versus the other
Yeah. Now
when they should be used.
yes, and this is exactly what I came up with. I believe I mentioned it last time uh, that uh, what we have not been clear about what question we're asking about solipsism, um, whether it is obviously the only correct view to have, or whether it is uh, a most useful uh, uh, idea to have or outlook to have uh, because of such and such, or whether it is the most ethical thing, depending upon one's ultimate ethical principle. If you're Humanian, then it would be, as you know, the Humanian ultimate ethical principle. Um, However, you might have a different ultimate ethical principle, and so it would be whether it was consistent with that or not. Or uh, whether it was the the outlook that most people have, um, implying that also you get along better in the world if you go along with everybody else.
Well, I
Uh,
mean, do you think one of those orientations is superior to the other? If we're going to start asking questions about solipsism versus empiricism, which is the right orientation, what's the right set of values that we should use to make that judgment? Is it one of utility? Is it one of ethics? Is it one of ontology, reality? This is the way it is?
yes,
Which one do you
that
think?
I'm in agreement that we have not yet
We haven't
uh,
done that.
decided what question we are really working on.
Yeah. Um, Personally, I am coming from the standpoint of the value system that I'm using to pick which one I would declare is the best one to live by, is the one that is most accurate to the way I think reality probably works. And
Okay.
again, solipsism doesn't mean I don't believe in reality.
Wait, you just used the word reality.
Right. I've got to say that. Solipsism doesn't mean we talked about this last time. Solipsism doesn't mean that reality doesn't exist. It means that you can't know what it is for sure.
Oh, well,
We talked about that. You don't
there's
remember.
no question about that. That's not the issue. But
I think that is a big issue.
where we have been disagreeing is I've been saying that there is such a thing as reality, and you're saying that there is no such thing as reality.
No. See, I think you're saying something else.
Then, but wait, and if there is a reality, then that you're going to use a different definition than mine.
No, what I'm saying is I think that you are too certain in the way you are too confident in your understanding of reality. I think there's not enough doubt there for me. I would like to see more.
Confident in your solipsistic view?
The view that I have solipsistically does not preclude an empiricist point of view. So it doesn't preclude somebody that like yourself, that I would argue that believes and makes assumptions about things outside the subjective experience. But it does seem that the opposite is not true. And I think this is one of the benefits of solipsism I talked about before. Solipsism casts doubt on everything, including solipsism itself. And I think usually what happens is the empiricist declares, this is the way something is, and you're right or wrong against it. And that is something that if you're truly taking a solipsist perspective, you kind of can't do.
Yeah, but
so I think
in between to say that there is a reality that is independent of anybody's beliefs about it or perceptions of it is not to say that one can be certain that a particular belief is indeed an accurate model of reality.
That seems to be maybe I'm completely misunderstanding your orientation. But that seems I've heard you say a lot of things like that. I've heard you say things, there's an objective standard you could be right or wrong against. I've heard you say there is a reality behind the curtain, we can just never know it. I've heard you say things that make me think otherwise.
Sorry?
So can you? Maybe I'm misunderstanding you when you say those.
What was the last thing you said?
When you say those things, it makes me feel like that's where I base my claim that you're overconfident based on those statements you've made that maybe I've misunderstood.
Overconfident.
So you're overconfident when you say there's an objective standard I can be right or wrong against. It seems that you're overconfident in saying there is some reality behind the curtain that we can never know. The orientation you're taking, I think, allows you to have more confidence than a solipsist would feel would be appropriate. I think the best you could do as a solipsist would say, I think there's probably some reality behind the curtain. I think there might be some kind of standard that somebody can be right or wrong against. I'm not sure, but that's what makes sense to me. So it sounds like we do have different orientations.
Like your position, your solipsistic position has become modified somewhat, but you're still. Indeed, there still is a difference. I would say again, that if indeed it is possible to be incorrect in your beliefs, then that means that, and the beliefs are the models of reality, then it means that reality is a certain way, independent of your beliefs about it. And so it's inherent in the concept that you can be wrong about something.
Yeah. See, this is something. I thought you were done. Go ahead.
Well, I keep wanting to go back and ask a question from some time ago, trying to get a clearer picture of the of where you and I disagree. And say it the same way. At 10 o'clock this morning, you weren't thinking at all about me. Did I exist at that time?
Right, and I would say we've had this discussion. No, not for me.
So sometimes I exist.
Not for me.
Don't. Sometimes, no, I didn't say for you. I said,
did I exist? Trick question. And the reason that that's a trick question is because it makes an assumption.
What's the assumption?
The assumption is that you have some kind of reality that you have some kind of reality for me, independent of my subjective experience. And I would argue that's not true. That makes an assumption you haven't shown yet.
Reality is independent of whatever your subjective experience of it might be, which is just a model of it. Whatever my subjective experience of it might be, just a model of it. The model can be correct or fairly accurate or very accurate or somewhat accurate or inaccurate or very inaccurate.
This is something that I have been in terms of accurate. Oh, were you done? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's just that that's what is implied in the idea of accuracy of belief. Go ahead.
See, what I'm about to convey in terms of what I can confidently say is accurate or inaccurate is something that I've been kind of living by to a certain degree for a couple of years, and was one of the seeds to me developing the orientation that I have right now. And that's the idea of being what I call being internally inconsistent. As a phenomenologist and a solipsist, I can still declare somebody as being wrong when they are internally inconsistent, when within their phenomenology, within their subjective experience, they're saying two different things. And that is an area where I can say, and I say it quite often to my mother, when she says one thing and then she says the exact opposite, where I kind of say, you know, what you just said is almost a non sequitur. It's just completely meaningless. It's wrong. So it's again, being a solipsist it has more to do with how you evaluate things and how you orient yourself to understanding things, rather than making any kind of absolute declarations about the way things are.
Well, absolute declaration about the way things really are, really reality. See,
no, what I would say, the way things are phenomenologically, the way things are within people's subjective experience. That's a domain I can assume exists. At least I personally can. I think there are some people who won't even say that. Some people will even say even your thoughts could be, you can't assume your thoughts are real. I wouldn't go that far. There are certain things that are very, very close to being a priori in nature, being innately true in the way we talked about it here.
Like what?
Well, I talked about the idea of consciousness. The consciousness is really, I think, definitively the only thing that is truly a priori. However, things that are very, very close to a priori are your thoughts, your feelings, your motivational states, which I would declare as part of feelings, your sensations, and your eyesight, feelings, all that kind of stuff. Now, once you start going outside of those things, those 7 things that I just talked about, that is all posteriori. That is all things that we understand through experience. That requires beliefs, and that's where everything becomes very, very fuzzy.
Yes, I got kind of lost. I think I got hung up somewhere and didn't follow the whole thing. Again, can you state what the basic solipsistic position is?
Solipsism is the idea that you cannot, and this is something I think we would agree on, it's just to what degree. You cannot, things outside of your objective experience cannot be known with any certainty.
Well, there's no problem with that. I wouldn't imagine that that would make a person a solipsist. I don't think that that's my understanding of solipsism is that it is the position that nothing exists other than what other than essentially your subjective experience. That may not be correct.
Well, I know that's not correct definitively. That's not how the dictionary defines it. That's not the way, based on my studies of it, that I've come to understand it.
Okay.
I think it's a distortion by people who haven't taken it, who just had a gut reaction to this idea, and they just say, "Oh, it's nonsense. You just think nothing exists." That's not at all what it is. I don't. My experience.
Okay. Then can you restate it again?
Solipsism is the idea that you cannot be confident that things exist outside your subjective experience. You can't be confident that things exist. Does it mean that you can't assume they exist? Does it mean that you can't say they probably exist? It just means you can't say that you can't, as a solipsist, you cannot say, I know for sure reality exists behind the curtain. That's all I'm saying. So I think you and I might both be solipsists, just to a different degree. I think I take it a little further than you do, because we do have similar orientations about many things. It's that I can't know with confidence that things exist outside my subjective experience. That anything exists with confidence. That's all that it means. And I think that that's a very that idea is very opposite how we would experience things and how we've been taught to understand things. We've been taught the empiricist point of view. Something exists out there, that's the way it is, and we can either be right or wrong against that. That's an empiricist point of view, which is the opposite of solipsism.
And what is the solipsist says that
solipsist would say maybe not. You can't know for sure. For you to state with certainty that X is this or Y is that because of X is an overconfident position. That's what solipsism means. You can't know with confidence. You can't know for sure. I like the idea. I like the word with confidence. You can't know with confidence
Well,
better.
so most everybody realizes that we can be mistaken and that we cannot be 100% confident about our beliefs, so there would not be disagreement there.
Oh, really? Oh, I think you and I have experienced the exact opposite of that.
What?
Almost everybody is completely confident in, that their beliefs are the way it actually absolutely is.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I understand that, uh, but those people still know that um, that their position could be incorrect. They do not believe it to be incorrect. Um,
I don't agree. I think there are certain things that if you speak to some of the people in a social circle, they will declare that to be true um, um, a priori. This is simply the way it is.
uh-huh. But they will still recognize that. I mean, if you ask them, well, do you think there's anybody in the world that might disagree with you? They would
Right.
say,
Well,
well,
and
yeah,
they probably say, yeah, but they're morons.
yeah, uh-huh.
Or they're what's the word that they use? Yeah, they're idiots. That's the word that comes to mind. They're wrong.
Yeah. No,
Um,
that's so still, I think that uh, everybody uh, would agree that yes, a person can be 100% confident about something and be incorrect. It's just not me, I would say.
um, yeah, I wonder though. I think there are people out there. I'm thinking reductionists who who actually would say that there are certain truths. They would use the word truths that are true. That's the way it is, independent of anyone's beliefs about them. And there's some kind of objective standard that we can be right or wrong against. And they take it on faith, essentially, that they're right. So I think that's just the real. I think that's the real difference between us. I think that you and I would argue, are both solipsists and empiricists at the same time. It's just like solipsism is on one side, empiricism is the other. It's like, where do I fall here? You kind of fall here. There we overlap in certain areas, but in other areas, I'm much more towards a solipsist perspective. And there are people who are even more solipsistic than I am. There's a famous philosopher in Greece. He was a skeptic, and the story goes that his friends would have to walk with him down the street because he didn't trust that anything existed outside of his mind. So like he might walk off a cliff or like walk into fire and really hurt himself. So there are people even more solipsistic than I am. So that's the difference I think is between us. What do you think?
Um, I, I, I think that among other things, perhaps, that you really um, do live according to uh, the belief that I have, uh, you have it also, that there is indeed the possibility of being incorrect, that for instance, if we don't understand reality correctly, we will not get our people back from the moon. We will not be able to make cell phones and computers, uh, and we will not be able to build skyscrapers and so forth. That that there is a reality that, and we can have accurate models of it, beliefs about it, or inaccurate models or beliefs about it. I think that uh, I imagine that you live your life that way, um, and that it might even be difficult to uh, live it another way. Uh, I, the person that you described, where people had to protect him from walking into fire and stuff like that, would be an example. So
Right.
maybe we would have
You
to.
hit the nail on the head. Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. What you just provide is the main critique of solipsism. I have to look up which philosopher said it. Maybe it was Kant. I can see Kant saying something like this, but the idea was that, in fact, solipsism is the fantasy that's created by language, that's created by, you know, our ability to imagine, and that a solipsist point of view is so contrary to what's required in order to live and to just to live, to even consider it is kind of pointless. That it's asking questions and it's pointing out things that are unknowable, that have nothing to do with the utility of living. And if you would actually adopt that philosophy, you couldn't live. And then on that basis, it kind of negates the whole, it makes even talking about it and considering it kind of pointless. Obviously, I don't agree with that position, but what you just said is a main critique. It's a critique that I've never, you know, that is a very strong critique.
You do not, that is not your opinion. So what is your opinion? What is the value or utility? How can you live according to it and live a better life?
Well, firstly, my opinion is that regardless of whether or not regardless of whether or not you can actually live by that philosophy, if it's more accurate to the way things, to the way, if it is more accurate to the psychology of humans and the way they understand their world and their subjective experience.
See, I didn't follow that.
What didn't you? Okay, let me try to use different words.
More accurate than what kind of that?
Right. I feel so. If solipsism, let me make the argument. Let me make my argument in the context of arguing against this philosopher. So I would say, with those arguments, that these are questions we can never know, we can't live by them, therefore there's no point in us talking about or having that beliefs. And my argument against that would say, I think that's probably true, but nonetheless, a solipsist point of view is the way, the true way that people experience and characterize reality. That's the way that you, I, and everybody on the planet have an experience of being in the world.
But you said experience reality.
Right.
You're making the assumption that there is reality.
No, I'm using the word reality because language has been based on certain limits and certain terms based on a primarily empiricist point of view. That,
See,
like I say, you cannot, you cannot, I cannot talk to you. This is the philosopher's point. I cannot talk to you without assuming you're there. I cannot talk to you without assuming you're real, you exist in reality, that you're separate from myself. And when you're separate from myself, and we're using terms like this, I have to use terms like reality. Again, a solipsist point of view doesn't assume reality doesn't exist. It assumes that I can't really know for sure you're really there outside my subjective experience. All you are to me is this image that's projected inside of my subjective experience. That's what I know is Bill. That's all a solipsism is saying.
In other words, you could be dreaming.
This might sound kind of, yeah, I could be dreaming. I could be in the Matrix. You could really be there, and you could actually exist in some way, and according to an empiricist point of view, I just can't know for sure. All you are to me, and this is the most accurate way of describing how people live. People experience things as a projection kind of inside their subjective experience. That's the only thing you can assume to be true and real. So that's one argument against this philosopher, that I would agree with everything you're saying. However, a solipsist point of view is more accurate to the way things are in reality in terms of the way people experience things.
In reality.
You can use the word reality. I've said that, Bill, I just said that. Using the word, a solipsist can still use the word reality. They can still do that. You can be a solipsist. You don't have to assume reality doesn't exist. It's not what it means. It just means I can't know for certain what it is. I can't be confident. I can't be confident that you actually are real, that you outside of my subjective experience. Reality consists of my subjective experience.
Could be an hallucination.
Could absolutely be a hallucination.
Mm-hmm.
I could death might be waking up from a dream and me saying, oh, I remember this guy Bill, and I'm somewhere else. I have no fucking idea. I don't know. Maybe. So anyway, that's one argument against it.
But that's not different from just a standard viewpoint. That's not that does not distinguish solipsism from non-solipsism.
Oh, it certainly does. I think that there are elements in people's ideologies that are when they really stop to think about it, is solipsist in nature. Buddhism is grounded in solipsism. That's absolutely the case. But anyway, that's my one critique of this. But the other critique is that it actually, then to your point, I believe there actually is great utility in this.
What?
In a solipsist point of view, in terms of how to live. Now,
what is utility?
The utility of that is that I'm going to talk about it in terms of Humanianity. The nature of the human is to dominate. One of its natures. We are like chimps, and a worldview that encourages the idea that there is some kind of objective reality that we could be right or wrong about adds fuel to that dominance fire. Okay. It gives people...
I understand what you're saying. However, I do not agree that solipsism is the answer to that. The answer to it, we are increasingly becoming aware of it, and that is indeed that in when there is disagreement, it is not appropriate to make the assumption of 100% certainty in one's own beliefs, and that there is value in discussing those differences for however long that it takes, depending upon time management issues and so on.
Well, I think solipsism goes one step beyond that. I think to characterize that position, I think more accurately, it would be to say it encourages conversation and talk about a belief I have in a position that is true. Otherwise, I wouldn't believe in it. I think, again, embedded within that orientation is this idea that there is a reality out there that either is right or wrong, and what we have to do is debate and talk about what that reality is and get aligned with what it is, so we can both agree, but we still both have the orientation that there is something outside of objective experience that is true. That's different than the solipsist point of view. The solipsist point of view would say, let me talk to Bill and see what, I know this is going to sound very new agey, but what his truth is, recognize it's just as valid as my truth is, and just have a discussion so I can learn about his position, he can learn about mine, and then we can go have a beer.
Yeah, right.
I don't have to convince you. I don't have to come to agreement.
Right. And so it is a way of, I agree, it is a way of handling the problem of difference of opinion, or the problem that difference of opinion not unusually stimulates a struggle for dominance, to see who is right and who is wrong, who wins, and so forth. And
it doesn't necessarily have to stimulate it.
So the postmodern approach to that is, well, you have your truth, I have my truth, so it doesn't matter, so we don't need to discuss it. Further discussion will not be profitable.
Well, but I think
so that enables people with different beliefs to still have a relationship with each other that is not characterized by struggle for dominance and anger and hostility and so forth. So
yes, but I'd like to add something.
Okay.
I'd like to add that the reason why the postmoderns adopt that point of view is not simply based on a utility. It's a consequence of what I would argue the postmodernist believes the way things really are. The postmodernist believes there really is that there are multiple truths. Two people can believe the opposite things and they're both true. And that naturally leads to this utility that happens to be beneficial. And I would argue the reason why it's so beneficial is because it reflects the way things actually are. The only thing, reality exists inside your subjective experience. And that's the only thing that you can have any degree to a point of confidence about.
There is a major reason why it is a non-optimal way of living. The postmodern approach is saying, well, what's true for you maybe is not true for me. There's no absolute truth, and so forth. And that is, I would maintain that one of the most important things that we need to strive for, that has amazing, has tremendous effect on our quality of life is accuracy of belief. Accuracy of belief, meaning that indeed one's beliefs are accurate models of reality.
Well, we talked about this idea of accuracy, and we see, I think, there's a difference of opinion. Again, a solipsist, it doesn't mean we can't sit down and talk about climate change and get people to agree that we have to do something about it. This doesn't mean that. And I think that's an important distinction. He's not doing well. I have to go soon. I don't know what's wrong with him. I think he has to pee. I don't want him to pee in my bed. But in any case, let's finish that. I really don't want him to pee in my bed.
Yeah.
Go ahead. He has some kind of bladder problem. But anyway, what were you going to say in response to that? It doesn't mean that you can't talk about climate change. It doesn't mean you can't come to agreement.
No, it doesn't mean you can't come to agreement, but the solipsistic position is, if you don't come to agreement, that's okay, because there's no guarantee that there's any such thing as reality. So on the other hand, if we make mistakes, if we don't, the effort to come to agreement is important in two ways. One is it enables, of course, cooperation, but the other is that when there is disagreement, it means that there's further discussion that's needed. And
no, I can understand that, but I don't think that this necessarily means that. Well, let me just quickly take climate change, for example.
okay.
It sounds like you and I are in the same position about climate change, that we think it's real. It would be a bad thing if it happened. Okay. Now, I would argue, I'm making, and you are making the assumption that's true. Okay.
What is true?
That climate change is real, it's man-made, and it would be bad for the planet.
Yeah, but I could be incorrect about it.
Well, absolutely. And the reason why you can be incorrect about it is because you cannot be really confident of anything outside your subjective experience. I mean, that's that's the whole point of solipsism.
No, but again, I don't think that is a solipsistic. A solipsistic position that makes a distinction between that position and that of other people who also agree that, well, we can't be certain about anything. We just try to increase the probability that our beliefs are accurate models of reality.
I agree with you. Everybody's solipsistic to a point of whether they know it or not. It's a matter of what degree you're in our society today, in the 21st century, in our culture. If you sit down and really flesh it out with people, almost everybody is going to be seen to be solipsist at the end of the day. It's a matter of how solipsistic they are. Okay, most people are going to say, yes, they're going to say, yes, but there are certain things that are really real, that for sure, independent of what anybody thinks. It's a matter of what point somebody says that at. Even I say that to a point, and you say it a little bit earlier. And then there are other people who are religious who will say it even sooner. But everybody in this culture would see that. And that's because we're in a we're in a post-Kantian world. I mean, there are certain philosophers that change the way we think about things. And one of the ideas they introduced was solipsism. And so everybody's like that to a degree. It's a matter of what degree you are at that way. I happen to be further down the path than most people, I think.
Further down the path
of solipsism.
In that it does not matter that we can't agree.
No, not at all.
What is
more down the path in the sense that there are more things that I consider to be subjective experience, and we can't be sure about it than most people. The only thing I can be absolutely sure is a priori is my consciousness. There are things that are close to that, my thoughts, my feelings, my motivational state, my senses, but anything outside of that is posteriori knowledge. It requires belief, and that's where uncertainty comes in. I can't know for sure. Anything that I experience, I can't know for sure about its true nature.
Well, that which you experience, you can't be sure about.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's the root of solipsism.
Yeah, but so now
that's Descartes. I think therefore I am.
So now what you're, it's like unknown to most people. They are really solipsistic because they recognize that they can't be completely confident about any of their beliefs.
Yeah, I think people would say that about a portion of their beliefs, and in that way they're solipsistic to a point. But I mean, the actual kind of, I'm taking some liberty with solipsism, and I'm saying you can be partially solipsist, but in the definition term, it's all or nothing. A solipsist is somebody that can't be confident about anything outside their subjective experience. I maintain there's more wiggle room there. You can be solipsistic about certain beliefs and more empiricist about others.
My impression is that the solipsistic position would be more a declaration of the way things really are.
Probably.
Yeah.
I mean, and it probably, and in doing so, they are violating the tenets of solipsism. Mm-hmm. That's human nature. Human nature is to dominate and say, this is right, that's wrong, I'm right, you're wrong, and that's not solipsism.
Okay, so again, the utility, as I am understanding it, is the avoidance of fights.
Well, I think there's a whole bunch of utilities about it. I think.
What else?
I think one is the something to combat the tendency for humans to dominate.
That's
and that leads to more harmonious and less fighting.
Yeah, well, that's what I was talking about. Now,
right.
What else?
I also think there's utility in that it helps us to understand. It helps me to understand. I have to use on time. It helps me. It helps me to understand. It helps me to answer ontological questions about, about everything. What's the actual existence of things?
But it doesn't seem to help because it's declaring that you can't know any of those things.
Right. Exactly. That's how it helps me to understand it. Because if I'm to hold an empiricist position, what's happening is that this is a certain way of thinking. I'm going to speak some poetry now, then I really have to go. But when I'm taking an empiricist position, I am taking, I am shrinking the nature of a thing to fit my limited understanding of it. And a solipsist point of view helps me to recognize that my understanding is a very small part of what that is. So it also encourages you to wonder, and encourages a sense of humility to always learn, and to always kind of to always seek out knowledge, and to in an effort to like very close to you, to get closer to that asymptotic of the way things kind of are outside of my subjective experience. That's another thing that it does. And it might do others. I would have to think, but off the top of my head, that's just two. But the main utility, I would agree, is harmony.
Can you state the the harmony, but can you state the second one again in this?
Humility that leads to increased knowledge.
I'm sorry?
I would say maybe, a humility in what we know that encourages learning.
Okay, well,
if I don't know, if I can't confidently state that I know the way it is, I'm open to new ideas. Whereas an empiricist who states, no, this is the way it is, would be closed.
Okay.
More probably.
Your way of portraying the empiricist may be incorrect. I can imagine that the empiricist would
absolutely
indeed say that I can't be confident about anything. I can just try to increase the probability of the accuracy of my beliefs.
Right, but about certain things, I think that there are things that the empiricist would be more likely to declare that is the way it is.
Example.
Huh?
An example?
That there is something out there for me to be more accurate about. That's one example, just off the top of my head. That a solipsist can certainly continue to be a physicist, be a rocket scientist, go to Mars. He could continue to do all those things, but when he sits down with somebody and talks about how he knows things work and that's the way it is, he's going to say, well, that's the way it is in my subjective experience. I have really no idea what's really happening outside my subjective experience. I know that in my subjective experience, if I take these actions, this is the result. So I think it kind of is a bit helpful in that way as well. But on that note, I got to go. He's going to pee. But what were you going to say?
Well, this second thing is, it's very difficult for me to see the solipsistic position being something different than what most people would readily accept, namely that they cannot be 100% certain of any of their beliefs. They could be, in a dream. They could be delusional, hallucinatory.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think most people, whether they know it or not, have solipsist orientations about lots of things.
But
definitely.
You're saying it's a matter of degree, and now, so the idea of solipsism is not real clear.
Well, I'm to be fair, I'm characterizing it as a continuum. But if I'm, I could say that's my own personal spin on it. Solipsism, in the way a philosopher would use it, would be a blanket statement. To be solipsist means you acknowledge that you cannot be sure, you cannot be confident of anything outside your subjective experience. If by that definition, nobody's solipsist. So I think that definition is, because per that philosopher's point, you can't live that way. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that definition presents an ideal that's, I know of nobody who can live that way.
Okay, so it seems to me that you and I are in agreement then, basic agreement, but that there's
Matter of
some
degree.
linguistic, no, I think
No?
there's linguistic difficulties having to do with the solipsistic position. The way I understand it is it's the position that whatever one is experiencing, that's all there is. And
as a result, you can't be confident of anything that exists outside that subjective experience.
well, that's a different issue. But see, the outside of, as I understand it, is not a part of the solipsistic position, that there is no outside of. And I may be incorrect about that.
I think it depends who you talk to. I think that there are certain people who would declare it that way, and then there are other people who wouldn't. Based on my readings, Husserl and these other people, Heidegger, I don't see it that way. I just see it that these people are saying you can't know with confidence of anything outside your subjective experience. That's all it means.
And I would say you can't know with confidence anything in your subjective experience.
Maybe that's an idea we could explore next time. I think that idea has merit, because I wonder if we're really saying the same thing.
I think we are. I think our difference of opinion is kind of an interesting phenomenon here as to what is actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we can talk some more about that next time.
All right, Bill. Sorry, I don't want him to pee. He's got a lot of problems with his health. So, all right. I'll see you next time.
Right. Take care.
Thanks, Bill. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Humanity, now we all can see. Humanity, how much better we can